I just said that to my daughter in Virginia, and we're gonna read it together. She lives so far, but we do a little book club together, the two of us.
That'll be cool. Because it's.
All right, hello everybody.
Hello.
Thank you all so much for joining us this evening. This is Left Bank Book Presents Leif Enger, the New York Times best-selling, award-winning, and, quote, formidably gifted, unquote, author, who is here to discuss his new book, I Cheerfully Refuse, a career-defining tour de force. So some notes before we begin. Today's event is only possible because of your support. So when you support Left Bank Books, your money goes directly into your local economy, so it funds our streets and parks and more. It also helps writers get the support they deserve and allows us to produce events such as this. So thank you all so much for shopping local and supporting this event tonight. We also want to thank those of you who are joining us from afar in our virtual audience. Thank you very much for being here as well as in your living rooms. You'll be able to participate in the Q&A session at the end by leaving your question as a comment on YouTube. So thank you very much. We at Left Bank have a fantastic calendar of events coming your way. This Friday, so the 12th at 7 p.m., we are delighted to welcome Jeanette Walls for the paperback release of her novel Half Broke Horses. And on Monday, April 15th, Esker David Johnson will be here to discuss his dreamlike yet jaunty epic, Pay As You Go. The full calendar of our upcoming events can be found on our website, so there's sure to be something for everybody. Check it out there. Now for tonight's event. Leif Enger grew up in Minnesota and worked as a reporter for Minnesota Public Radio before writing his best-selling debut novel, Peace Like a River, which won the Book Sense Award for Fiction and was named one of the year's best books by Time Magazine and the Los Angeles Times. The second novel, So Brave, Young, and Handsome, was also a national bestseller. It was a Midwest Booksellers Honor Award and won the High Plains Book Award for Fiction. His third novel, Virgil Wander, was longlisted for the Carnegie Medal for Excellence in Fiction and was named a Best Book of the Year by Bookpage, Chicago Public Library, and more. His new book, I Cheerfully Refuse, set in a not-so-distant America, is the tale of a bereaved and pursued musician embarking, that'll be the sequel, embarking under sail on a sentient Lake Superior in search of his departed, deeply beloved book-selling wife. I Cheerfully Refuse epitomizes the musical, sometimes magical, and deeply satisfying kind of storytelling, for which Leif Enger is cherished. A rollicking narrative in the most evocative of settings, this latest novel is a symphony against despair and a rallying cry for the future. According to Kirkus Review, there's both a playfulness and a seriousness of purpose to the latest from this Minnesota novelist, a spirit of whimsy that keeps hope flickering even in the times of darkest despair. Please join me tonight in welcoming Leif Enger.
Maybe a magician would have been better. Thank you for the intro. And thanks for letting me come and talk to you guys tonight. I'm really, really happy to be here.
Thank you for coming.
COVID got old in a hurry. And everything changed, everything shut down. But I'll have to say that in some ways it was not entirely bad for me. I actually started this book the day Minnesota went into lockdown. So like March 15th or 16th, I should look back at my notes and see if I can discover exactly which day that was, middle of March. And I've been making notes for this story for a couple of years, ever since I my previous book. I've just been puzzling away on it. I really wanted to do something that would utilize Lake Superior, because Lake Superior is this majestic. It's like a minor deity, if you live within its reach, because there's a mythic quality to it. It doesn't matter if it's calm or if it's blowing or if it's confused or violent. It always just sort of throws its magic around. It's like an active volcano. It's just always throwing its spell. And that kind of got its hooks into me quite a long time ago. The first time I went out sailing on those waters with some friends who had a boat. And I just thought, oh, someday I need to write about this. But I didn't want to write a present day novel, and I didn't want to write a novel that would be a historical, because I didn't want to do all the research. But what's great about Lake Superior in the past is that it was such a dangerous body of water. I mean, there are hundreds of shipwrecks on its floor. There are 10,000 bodies on the bottom of Lake Superior. And it is a very treacherous body of water. But I didn't really want to write a historical novel, and I didn't see how to write one in present day that would give the lake the kind of threat I wanted it to have. And so then I guess maybe in 2018 or 19, I read an article about the dangers being posed to satellite navigation by solar flares. Solar flares at that point were starting to knock out satellites, and there were episodes where sea captains were unable to navigate by GPS. And I thought, well, that's kind of interesting. And the more I thought about it, the more it seemed like, well, what else might be going on in a world 30 or 40 years from now? What other trends are there? What things are happening that might lead us to an interesting spot? And it struck me that it's quite likely that the scarcity of resources is going to get worse, and that resources will tend to move up instead of down. That doesn't seem unlikely to me. And so the more I thought about it, the more I thought, okay, maybe it's time to write a story about, here's the other thing that happened. I started having grandchildren, like right now. And I started really caring about what the world might be in 30 or 40 years. That was new to me. And so I thought, okay, suppose that I wrote kind of a cautionary tale, and I could set it on Lake Superior, my favorite place. And look, the tale is being called a dystopia. I'm a little uncomfortable with that description because most dystopian novels, and there are some great ones, I like a good dystopian tale, but they tend to be things that are set in motion by an asteroid strike or a nuclear war or a huge flood or, the rapture or whatever, take your pick. There are plenty of scenarios that can launch you into a kind of a bummer of a world. But this one isn't. This one is just simply the kind of world that we could easily find ourselves in without meaning to. We could wake up one day and find out that 16 families own everything and that indentured servitude has made a huge comeback. That's the sort of thing that could happen in this world. It is not that hard to imagine. And so then that gave me, if you couple that with knocking out GPS navigation, you have a world in which, once again, Lake Superior is one of those places that you only go if you really have to, if you need to get away from someone, if you are being pursued. It's once again that wild entity that it always was. And so then it was just a matter of coming up with some characters that I could love for the 3 or 4 years it would take me to do it. And I was at an event the other night, and a young guy in a writing program said, if you could give me one piece of writing advice, what would it be? Pretty broad question, right? But I knew what it was, and it was, if you're going to write a novel, make sure that the people you're writing about are people that you can love deeply, because 3 or 4 years is a long time in a small vehicle. So make sure you love the people, and also make sure you love the place. If you're writing about a geography that doesn't excite you, that will show up in your prose. And so I had this advantage of a place that I love, And then when I was thinking about the people, look, here's a firm belief of mine, yet to be proved out, but I think it would prove out. And that is that no matter how dysfunctional the world becomes, people are still going to fall in love. People are still going to do crazy things for the people they love. There's no line they won't cross. They're going to take any risk. Oh, good, there's a shop cat. Excellent. And so the thing that came to my mind when I first sat down on March the 16th to start the story was a scene where my narrator, my protagonist, whose name is Rainey, and who is an electric bass player in a bar band called Red Dog, and has also been a house painter, and has also been kind of a non-reader. When he is 28 years old, he goes into a library in Duluth, Minnesota, and he doesn't go there to get a book. He goes there because it's a warm place, to eat a cheese sandwich that he has along. But he takes a spot in a study carrel and he hears this voice, the voice of a librarian. And I'm just going to read you this scene because it makes me happy every time I read it. By age 28, I was working as a house painter and sitting in with 2 or 3 tavern bands in Duluth. At noon one winter day, I left my job detailing a stucco high-ender with hardwood moldings and a crenellated roof like a battlement. Embarrassed to eat near meticulous homeowners, I strolled a few blocks to the library for a covert lunch and a study carrel. The carrel was around the corner from the help desk, where a woman with a quiet, radiant voice explained technology to ancients. There didn't seem to be any non-ancients in the library that day, only her at the desk and me, who just wanted a warm place to eat a cheese sandwich. Craned as I might, I couldn't catch sight of her, which only made her voice more arresting. The library had recently scaled back its services, and there was a long shuffling queue waiting for assistance. What happened to their online therapeutics? Why had their credits been refused? Their inquiries were nervous, angry, imperious, frightened. Her voice in reply was low and melodious. It settled them, reminded them they were in the right place. I hadn't felt anxious at all sitting there at my carrel, yet I too felt soothed by her delivery and shut my eyes to listen. Almost right away, it became impossible not to imagine hearing that voice morning and night. A voice that was the opposite of panic. On my way out, I tried again to glimpse its owner, but she was obscured behind a mammoth gesturing clergyman filing a subversive materials complaint. Same carol next day, another cheese sandwich. I went back, hoping to hear again that easy, low music. And sure enough, there it was, addressing the agitation and pain of the fearful. This time I sensed a trace of humor or affection down inside her voice. Again, I was stirred by a nameless melancholy, by envy for those who lived within that frequency. I didn't think of it in those words. Picture a voice like a river's edge, where the water turns back on itself, orbits quietly, proceeds downstream in laughter. This time when I left, she'd gone on break. Again, I was denied the sight of she who had beguiled me. In later visits, I paid attention not just to tone, but to content. Pulling books as camouflage, I took a carrel nearer her desk, though still out of view. She did far more than direct people to charts and information. She had a way of answering unasked questions. I've lost my place. Finessing and adjusting her recommendations. History for the ambitious, novels for the lonely, poetry for the heartbroken, all of it a lettered world alien to me. I began to take notes. Dickens, she replied in a near whisper to one request. And Dickens, I wrote in stub pencil. Why, you ask? How would I know? When a flame is lit, move toward it. Titles, authors, barely floated notions, whatever she said, that's what I scribbled. I didn't yet know the word oracle, but she had that smoky appeal. There seemed no person she couldn't understand, no question too dead to resurrect. She told a bored girl about a 16th century poet whose goal was to read everything ever written. Think about that. The girl did not believe her, but I did. Apparently this poet went blind in the attempt. Luminous is another word I didn't know. I finished the affluent stucco but kept eating in the library. By now, I had effected a nonchalant stroll past the information desk and found to my increasing turmoil that even beyond her bewitching voice, I wished to look at her forever. Her twisty dark hair fleeing its restraints, her wine-dark river's kiss of a birthmark. Chancing a single casual glance at her green eyes, I got an impression of curiosity and wit, and maybe a little mockery zipping around back there like fireflies. In desperation, I acquired a notepad and ballpoint and expanded my use of the library to actual books. Dickens turned out a hard go. Twist? No. The beatings go on and on. But I stuck with it. Next writer on my scrappy list was this woman Connor, whose people were confused and malformed and placed in the world as if by the god of cruelty. I could hardly bear those stories. Yet, linked together, they became a rope ladder you climbed with knees and elbows out of whatever dragged you down. After this, I seemed to enter a zone of madness. It's a blur now, it was then. I couldn't afford not to work, so to sustain the madness, I worked badly, falling into books while latex congealed on my brushes and rollers. Not everything caught, but some did. I loved the crazy fight where Beowulf goes hammer and tongs with Grendel in the longhouse, gripping the monster's arm like the world's first clamp and finally tearing it off, hairy shoulder included, and hanging it in the rafters to drip. Holy smokes! I was taken in too by the long boat ride of Odysseus with its 1,000 interruptions, Circe with her ominous pig yard, what had to be an invigorating layover with Calypso, and the startling wit of the Cyclops, announcing a nice surprise for Odysseus, but then guess what it was? You shall be eaten last. Well, come on. Painting jobs thinned into the distance as these stories swallowed whole afternoons, a dazed reader wrapped in stormy light cast by Lake Superior that raging autumn when the sun got lost for 7 weeks straight in a rack of permanent clouds. I banged and barged through dozens and hundreds of books discovered in my eavesdropping sessions, not just adventures, but also poetry, sweet Jesus, by Greeks and Brits and Japanese whose silky names I never can remember. Did I understand it? Not by half, but when it thunders, you know your chest is shaking. These thieves and lovers and wandering poets, what big lives they had. I began watching everyone I met for secret greatness. I read about vanished glaciers in books of scorned science, then a monograph by the raging climatologist Holloway, who predicted Lake Superior would shortly warm enough to yield bodies that had lain on the seafloor for centuries. The navigators, cooks, and ancient braves, the unlucky swimmers of antiquity, and sure enough, Holloway hadn't been gone a decade before these dead began coming ashore, washing up in the shallows, waxy and gaping in their period clothes, frightening children on the beaches, and once tripping up a fleet of racing yachts as they foiled to an upwind mark. After Odin traded an eye for knowledge, I had 8 days of sympathetic response where my own left eye went dark. Recalling the poet gone blind in his zeal, I considered taking a breather, but by then was deep in the tale of a minotaur who falls for an American waitress. I couldn't bear the suspense. Would they find happiness together? I bent down to the pages with my solo eyeball blinking constantly to keep from drying out. Reaching the end, I discovered I still had both eyes after all. They both worked fine, and in fact were full of tears. So that was the first thing I wrote in this story. It's not the beginning of the book, but it's close enough. And that's the only part I barely had to rewrite. I do many drafts. That's part of the reason I'm so slow. Is I write it and I rewrite it again and again and again and again. It's the only way I can write sentences that I like to read aloud. But that scene didn't change much. I love the idea of kind of a big hulking bass player going to a library and falling in love with a woman he can't even see. That was delightful to me. I think delight is my main motivator, actually. So here you have Rainey falling in love twice. Once with the woman he hears in the library. And then, to his surprise, this is the part he didn't see coming, although I did. He falls for literature itself and for the process of being swept up. It's not just what you read or what you remember about what you read. It's the glory of that process when you fall into a story just like a river, and it just carries you somewhere else. I remember the first time that this happened to me. I was 8, and the book was The Wind in the Willows. And, there's a river in that book. This is no accident. And I remember that I was in my room. I'd probably been sent there sternly. And picking that book up and just suddenly being somewhere else, being on the riverbank, meeting the water rat and the wonderful otter and the badger and toad and the mole and all the rest of them. And every time I read a book that does that to me, my world gets a little bit bigger. And so that is what happens to Rainey as a grown man, is he discovers that particular magic. And that is something that a person can find at any point in their life if they just have the literacy to do it. In this world, literacy has become frowned upon in Rainey's time. And that's something that is kind of a fear of mine. I don't want that to happen. It could, but it is why it's so important to have places like this, places like great bookstores and great libraries, which when you walk into them, look, there are millions of sentences in this place, and any one of them can be the one that grabs you. Bookstores are full of beautiful and dangerous ideas, ideas just filled with potential. And I think that we need to support and protect them at every cost, because they represent to me the future. I want to read one more short bit, and then we'll just talk a little bit. If you want to, if you have any questions or observations. Unresolved anger issues. Here's a scene I particularly like. There are children in this book because they're still kids. They're still kids even in that world. And Rainey likes them and does his best by them, which is a good thing because later in the book he takes on a responsibility. Monday mornings I spent with a parlor full of children in a large house where the wind blew through and everyone wore coats. Ostensibly, I was there to impart music fundamentals. But their supervisor, Cora, warned me early these were demanding children. They all rated at least 5 on the feral comportment continuum. Some were 7s or 8s. Most had received in utero chemical violations that rendered them impervious to reality. So my true assignment was to distract them an hour a week with songs and stories. That was all I could do in any case, since theory and notation are mysterious to me. As for the students, they were energetic, impulsive. We hit it off. My size was in my favor. Sometimes I held my arms straight out and let 4 or 5 of them dangle and swing until they wore down enough to listen. Several believed I was a bear in human form, and I was careful not to screw up this impression. Until I was 10, I believed my own grandfather was a Kodiak bear. His shaggy head, his rolling shoulders, his discomfort with houses and language. It still seems true. I liked those kids from the start, and this never changed, even when things flew apart around me, as you are soon to witness. I remember this particular Monday because one of the boys, Tonio, whom Cora warned me was a high 8 on the feral comportment scale, seemed unusually detached. Normally when Tonio saw me, he leapt up and came at a sprint, dodging chairs and classmates, putting his head down and ramming at my stomach as hard as he could. He was big for his age, and the first time it happened, Cora tried to stop him and got flattened. Now she let him run. My impulse was to sweep him up and twirl him around my shoulders, but this frightened him beyond control. What he needed was for me to take the hit and then hang on to him until quiet arrived. I didn't mind. Tonio had a broad, pale forehead with a small heart-shaped cleft at the peak. In class, he never spoke, but responded to music by leaning slightly to one side, while his eyes defocused as if looking inward. Maybe he saw people in there, or herons, or moving rivers. Maybe he was a secret Billy Pilgrim about to come unstuck. The songs I played in Cora's chilly parlor were chosen largely by what Tonio might like. I walked in that day with bass and battery amp and a handful of recordings. The kids saw me and started bellowing favorites. Octopus Garden, Don't Worry, Be Happy. I expected Tonio to leap up and bust my ribs, but he sat isolated on a plastic ottoman with bits of yellow foam poking out the seams. I called hello to the kids one by one, got a few names wrong, and they corrected me with aggressive shouts. When I said Tonio, he gave a stilted smile and drifted back to his fugue. No doubt there were times I went through the motions, but something was off with all the kids that day. They were addled and pent up. To get them back, I went full on with the zingiest stories I had about Django Reinhardt becoming king of jazz despite his ruined fingers, Robert Johnson's cigarette with smooth old Satan at the crossroads, early maestro Orpheus playing dates in hell to free his girl, valiant stuff, you'll agree, with major stakes and undertones of ceaseless torment. It should have brought nosebleeds of joy and terror, but no. The kids sizzled with impending violence. They'd had snacks before I arrived and now flung bits of cookie and dried fruit. Chiefly, they flung them at Tonio, an easy target. He covered his face with his arms, which somehow made them meaner, as if they'd all awakened to some threat he represented. I gave up talk for music, played upbeat melodies, invited them forward to lay their fingers on the fretboard, let them twist the tuning knobs to hear the rise and fall. I spoke quietly while hitting sonorous notes on the fat strings, an attempt at stupefaction that didn't work except on Cora, who dropped off immediately with her hands dangling and her narrow mouth open like something come untied. At the end of this long hour, I was loading the car when Tonio slipped out the door. I didn't notice till he was halfway to me. "Hello, my friend," I said. But then a small pack of classmates poured out after him, their flat eyes, their wet teeth. Tonio fled awkwardly toward me, was shoved from behind and landed on his face near my feet. What surprised me wasn't their spite. Kids can't always help it. Their souls are new and feeling their way. The surprise was Cora, who stood behind them in the doorway. She mirrored their cruelty. No, she steered it. A beaky meanness of lips and chin, looking down at Tonio as he crawled between my shoes for safety. Well, anger rose in me. If they wanted a bear, then all right. My chest grew broad, my neck thickened. A growl formed in the earth and came up through my lungs. Instantly, the kids fell back. They slumped and paled, remembered their small selves. Cora remained looking my direction with overt disgust. When she went inside at last, I told the shaking Tonio all was well. "Count on me," I told him. "Tonio, listen," I said, because I was naive and large with fury. "You tell the others you are under my protection. Look at my face, my shoulders. Do you see these hands?" He nodded, but was still miserable and afraid. I said, "You tell her too, your teacher. Tell her you and me are friends. Say it back to me." "Friends," he said. It didn't change his terrified expression. "It's taken all my life to learn protection is the promise you can't make. It sounds absolute, and you mean it and believe it, but that vow is provisional and makeshift, and no God ever lived who could keep it half the time."
Wow.
Sorry to drop a heavy one on you there. There's a lot of lightheartedness in the book too. Does anybody have anything they want to ask or observe? Or a reading recommendation for me? I'm always angling for those.
I had a question about
Yeah.
the bad guys in your books.
Yeah.
meeting you in person only confirms that you're just so sweet and kind and gentle. And you portray those people so threateningly.
Yeah.
And then you say you have to write characters that you love. So how do you love those bad guys?
Yeah.
Or are they foils to your good guys?
No, that's a great question. My bad guys, and I would say particularly in this book, my bad guys always seem to be a variety of bully. I have no tolerance for bullies. I don't do well with them. Like most novelists, I was a bullied child. Then we grow up and we take our revenge. But I think what's so lovely about the process of writing, especially when you maybe are as kind of deliberate as I am, kind of slow, is that you learn to develop. Sometimes you can't love your character right away. Sometimes you got to let them be what they are, and you come to love them over time. So with a man named Warwick, who's the chief sort of villain of this piece, when he entered the story, I knew exactly what he was, and I didn't have much tolerance for him. But the more that I wrote him, the more I came to, I never came to like him. Liking isn't the point. But I think that you can't be fair to a character if you don't have some affection for them, if you don't have a sort of creative love for them. It's a little bit like when you meet someone in real life and you think, oh man, this person and I are not going to get along. And then you listen to them talk for 8 minutes and you think, okay, I kind of like this guy. That happens to me all the time. I mean, people just upset and upend my expectations. And the same thing happens if I'm writing fiction. So a bad guy enters the story, and if I have a hard time liking him, I just let him talk for a while. I just write pages that don't make it into the book. I get up in the morning and I do my usual morning pages, a la Julia Cameron in the Artist's Way, and I just let them talk. I ask them questions. I interview the characters, and they tell me what they think about things. And inevitably, I reach a point where I not only tolerate them, I'm kind of glad to see them when they show up. There's a series of conversations late in this story where Rainey is in a position to speak with Warwick kind of a lot. It's a little bit of a David and Saul dynamic, where one person has all the power, but his spirit is troubled, and he sends for the musician, and who can put his soul at ease. And I knew those conversations were coming, and I looked forward to them the whole way through. They dangled in front of me like a reward, like a treat. And then they were such fun to write. And by that time, I understood why Warwick was the way he is. Didn't make me like him, but it made me understand him. So that's kind of the glory of writing fiction, is that you can learn a lot about actual people, I think, by doing it. And of course, they're informed by the real people that you know as well. What a great question.
Thank you.
Yeah. Anything else?
Sure.
Yes.
This author recently told me that writing fiction must include empathy, evil, and suspense. What would be your tenets of how you kind of think about fiction as essentials?
Yeah, those are really, really good ones.
Mm-hmm.
Empathy, evil, suspense. I would add joy.
Mm-hmm.
One of the scenes that I remember the best from The Wind in the Willows is this very early scene where Mole has come out of the ground. You guys know this story?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Mole comes out of the ground, it's spring, and he puts off his house cleaning and he goes running around and he comes to the river, and there's the water rat. And before he knows it, the rat has said, "Hey, let's have a picnic." And so, Mole can't believe his great luck. He gets in the boat, and they go downstream, and when they get to the area where they're going to have the picnic, water rat brings out the picnic basket, and they unload it, and there's like half a page of description of all the food they've brought along. It's this giant repast for two small animals. And I just remember reading it over and over and over because it was just this sense of abundance, just this sense of unearned joy. They didn't do a thing to deserve it. There it is. I would say some of that, along with your suspense, for sure. Yeah, joy. If I think of anything else, I'll let you know.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yes.
I read about a half article about Lake Superior recently, and I would have read the whole thing if I'd known it was going to come up again. But I know that there are a lot of bodies in Lake Superior, and there's some scientific reason, the salinity or the currents or the way it works. And I didn't finish the article, but I thought I'd ask an expert, practically and poetically, what do you think it is that causes Lake Superior to hold on to the things that it's given?
It is the temperature. The bottom of Lake Superior holds steady at about 38 degrees. I remember the day I found out that a body rises at 39 degrees. And so global warming, it has been slowly rising. The temperature of lakes, this year it didn't freeze at all. And if it rises another degree, there could be some excitement along our shores.
An abundance.
I don't know if that will happen or not. I don't know if maybe the bodies are, look, I've sort of been obsessed by the bodies in Superior since I read the Brown Dog stories by Jim Harrison. And he wrote a great story about a diver who is illegally diving some wrecks, and he finds the body of a Native American he believes to be his father sitting on a ledge in 90 feet of water. And I remember thinking, oh my goodness. And so I read a little bit about it, and indeed, when they've discovered bodies at the bottom, they're not in bad shape. You've seen friends looking worse. And so that, look, there are just these little ideas that get in there. You have to do something with it. If you find out that, even in theory, even if it never happens, even if it goes to 45 degrees and no bodies, I'm an idiot if I don't use this in a story. And I think I used it to fairly decent effect. Thanks. How are we doing for time?
We're doing great.
Yeah, yes.
I was just gonna add a comment. I think it's the bacteria that decomposes bodies that don't do their decomposing thing until about 39 or 40 degrees.
Right, at 39, they start to produce gas.
And then they bloat and then they
Then they come
rise. So
Yeah, that's the
there we
science.
go, just in case
Yeah, that's
you
the
need
science.
that clarification. Sorry.
I guess I prefer to
Yeah.
speak in magic.
Sorry.
Yes, sir.
I noticed that you used to work for public radio.
I did, yeah.
Can you tell us what you did as a producer or a reporter and how you transitioned?
Yeah, I was mostly a features and documentaries producer and reporter for about 15 years. I loved that job. It was a radio job just made for somebody like me. I wasn't a very good reporter when it came to hard news. Hard news I found intimidating and boring. I would go to city council meetings and report on that. Oh, it was stultifying, and I was unable, with all my adjectives, I was unable to make them interesting. And then they very wisely put me on the sort of feature beat and said, go find the coolest people that you can find, and give us some artists and give us some writers and give us some potters and quilters and poets you know, just interesting people. And I did that, and it was life-changing for me because honestly, I grew up as sort of I wasn't retiring, but I was kind of shy about meeting people, like a lot of kids are. And I was still that way when I began in radio. But then you realize a couple of things. One is that everybody has a really interesting story to tell, and it's just a matter of giving them the encouragement to tell it well. And the other is that if you're carrying a microphone, that's like license to ask anybody anything. And they kind of feel like they should answer. What a glorious secret to discover. The other thing that I found really helpful about doing radio work was the discovery that the spoken word reveals bad writing. So if I was writing a story and I would go into the studio with it and be unable to read it in a convincing way, if I stumbled over the words, that meant it had to be rewritten. It didn't mean that I was a clumsy reader, it meant I was a clumsy writer. Isn't that an interesting, and I had no clue, but one of my editors said, oh yeah, here's why you can't read this. It's badly written. He was right. So that gave me a secret weapon that I use in fiction. Whenever I finish a scene that I particularly enjoy, or a problematic chapter that I don't know how to fix, whatever it might be, I print it off, I run downstairs, I ask my wife, Robin, hey, can I try this out on you? And she gives me full attention, and I read to her. And if I stumble, a rewrite is in order. And this has been a very useful tool for me. I encourage other writers to do some version of that, because it is very difficult to read well something that is written badly. The transition. I had like this sort of, my brother Lynn and I had written crime novels together. And while I was reporting for NPR, Lynn and I were writing the Gunn Peterson mysteries, which were set in northern Minnesota. And they were published by Pocket Books for next to no money. And also, they had no readership, really. I mean, I don't know why they kept paying us to write them. I guess they were just thinking, well, we'll just throw a little bit more at this and maybe something will catch on. And look, that happened to a lot of writers. Robert B. Parker, that happened for Lawrence Block. A lot of it was a golden age kind of mysteries. Elmore Leonard was writing some great stuff. And Lynn and I did this kind of on a lark. But it really didn't take off for us. But what it did was it taught me a lot about how to write a clean declarative sentence, and how to thread in a mystery, how to build suspense. It was great training. Lynn and I both really benefited from that. And so then that led into enough confidence, I think, that when I finished Peace Like a River, which is the book that sort of gave me what was required to leave reporting, when that suddenly sold, I mean, that had been on the vine for 5 years, and then suddenly it came ripe, and it sold for, kind of a good advance. So I was able to walk away from reporting. That was good timing for me because, Hemingway said, reporting is great training for fiction writing if you get out early enough. And I could see that if I stayed longer, I would never leave. I would still be there today. And that wouldn't be bad. A lot of my friends stayed for many, many years and had good careers, and I could have been happy with that too. But I just had this itch. I was itchy. I wanted to be a novelist if I could. Somebody would say, ask a question of one of my favorite writers, how do you describe yourself? And the guy said, I'm a novelist. And I thought, what a beautiful thing to say.
I was wondering if you come from a family of writers or linguists or people who are very involved with.
I would say readers and storytellers. Yeah, not writers really, but there were always a lot of books around. My mom read the local ran the local chapter of the Great Books. Remember those Great Books editions?
Yeah.
They were kind of cool. It's kind of hefty little paperbacks, and so those books were always around. I remember being 6 or 7 and going to that bookshelf and pulling down like James Joyce, and Mom saying, maybe not that one quite yet. I wouldn't have been able to read it anyway. I wasn't some precocious genius or anything, but I was curious. What's in here? And then my dad was not the reader that my mom was, but he was a very good storyteller. And when Dad would tell the bedtime story, that's when it was going to be exciting. Because Mom would tell stories about, butterflies that she's trying to get me to go to sleep. But Dad would tell stories about growing up in North Dakota and outwitting the game wardens by switching clothes with his brothers and racing through the swamp. And it was like, oh! So he knew how to build some suspense. He did. So stories were always around for sure. Yeah. But Lynn and I, the fact that both of us became novelists, I think, was a product of that and kind of cool, really. Lynn is still one of my early readers, and I'm one of his. When one of us has a last story, there was a week some years ago when I was in Bayfield, Wisconsin. My brother Lynn was in Fargo, Moorhead, and my son John, who at that time was a reporter for Minnesota Public Radio, following in my footsteps, he was in Bemidji, Minnesota, and all three of us had just finished novels. And Lynn said, let's do this. Let's all read each other's books this week, and then we can have a powwow about it. So we did that. And I just, there were 1,200 pages of Enger stuff in the cyber world, right? Just spinning around and then coming down to our computers, and we were reading this stuff. All these pages. It was so much fun because I sort of felt in a way like we had all written each other's stuff. It was a very strange feeling. The characters had real similarities, and the writing styles were all kind of similar, and none of us had any sense of what these books were going to be. Eventually, all three of those books got published. It was pretty cool. Yeah, I felt real happy. I think Mom would have been proud.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
How many grandchildren?
I have 4. Just got. My hesitation is, I just got a new one. I'm still losing track. Yeah, 4 grandchildren, 3 girls and a boy. Fantastic. Yeah, it's really fun. Yes.
Have you gotten to read The Wind in the Willows to any of them?
Not yet.
Great question.
This Frankie is almost old enough. Right now, when I read to Frankie, he has a hard time sitting still for Grandpa. So we read shorter books. Wind in the Willows is, pretty long for a little kid of 6. But it won't be long, and he'll be after it. Yes.
A little bit in this one, but more so with Virgil Wander. Where do the kites come from?
Oh, just a lifelong love of kites. I discovered a book when I was in junior high. Just a large, coffee table sized book by Will Yolen, who was the father of Jane Yolen, who wrote many great children's books. And Will Yolen was this kind of renowned kite flyer of Central Park in New York. And he wrote this brilliant, funny compendium of kite knowledge with photographs and plans for kites. And I took it out of the library so many times that because I was using the patterns, and eventually I ruined the book by getting glue in the pages. Because you're going glue and paper and bamboo and all that stuff. But I became obsessed by them. There's something about wind. And so I just never stopped. I have a kite along it's at the hotel. I never tour without a kite in my bag because you never know. When I was touring for Peace Like a River, it was a huge tour. And at one point, all 4 of us in the family rented a Jeep Cherokee, and we drove 10,000 miles in 30 days. And we flew kites in like 20 states because we just wouldn't leave a state until we'd flown. It was really fun. The kids remember that. That's what they remember about the book tour. To them, it was a kite flying tour. Yeah.
Where were you for the eclipse? And did you notice that change in the winds?
Oh, I did. I was in Naperville, suburb of Chicago. And I'd walked about 3 miles to get to a nice park. Although I could have watched it from anywhere. It was almost straight overhead. But I wanted to go to a park. I thought about bringing my kite, but I didn't do it. I wanted to pay full attention to the eclipse, which was great. Clear skies. I was on the phone with Robin the whole time. She was back home in Duluth with clouds. So she was watching it on CNN and listening to my description. I wasn't in the path of totality. So she would say, "What does it look like now?" And I would say, "A fingernail that's on fire." And it was very, did you guys watch it?
Yes.
Wow, wasn't it something?
Yes.
Mind blowing. I've never seen one before. I mean, in 2017, I didn't have the glasses for the one that happened that year. So I did that cardboard box trick where you watch the shadow. And that was cool. But this was cooler.
And you weren't in totality?
No, 94%.
Let me tell you something.
Were you in
I heard-
totality?
No, I was here, so we didn't have totality
Yeah.
here. But in 2017, I saw totality, and everything changes. So the birds stop chirping and the insects stop making noise. It's dark and completely silent. It's
Yeah.
incredible. But what I heard someone say was the difference between seeing an eclipse and even 99% eclipse,
Yeah.
the difference between seeing that and seeing totality is like the difference between a kiss on the cheek and a night of passion.
Oh, what a wonderful description.
Isn't it? So you have to be
I
around
have
for the
got to.
next one.
Yeah,
because it's something
this is going to
else.
merit some travel. Yeah, I've heard similar descriptions, and I it was a thrill for me just to watch the 93 or whatever it was, and to see the color of the light change, and the robins all started singing their night songs, which are different than their those evening bird calls are special, and the park suddenly was full of them. They were everywhere, and there was a change in the temperature.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of sort of reverence from the people who had gathered in the park. And that was cool, but I was thinking about that totality. Honestly, the kiss on the cheek is all right.
It's sweet, but you can't be compared.
No, that's right. Yeah. Yes.
To sort of change gears, did you know a tin lurvy?
No, I didn't.
Where did that come from?
Well, I knew a guy that was a little bit like Tim, but the name actually came from Charlotte's Web. Not Tin, but there's a lurvy in Charlotte's Web. He's a hired man. And so right away you hear, lurvy, pigs out, lurvy, pigs out. And I remember hearing that on a recording of E.B. White reading it, and his reading is so lovely. It's just wonderful in E.B.'s voice. And I just thought, I'm going to steal that name. I'm going to steal that one day. And I did. And I've been glad ever since. But there was a guy in Las Vegas named Ernie Tinberg. So I sort of honored him by taking Tin and then Lurvy. Thank you for asking. I haven't thought about Tin Lurvy in a long time.
I think about tin lurvy all the
And we've got time for just one more question, if anyone has one here in person or online.
So do you play the electric bass, or if not, where did that storyline come from?
No, I play the bass. I played, I haven't played in a while now, although I'm about to start again. In about 2003, my sister and brother-in-law moved up. He was a pastor, and he took a church near where we lived. We started going to his church. And he's a terrific musician, just a great musician. He has jammed with Bonnie Raitt, you know, he's that level of guitar player. And he asked me if I would play bass for the church band. And I had never played bass, but he taught me how. And you know, the great thing about a bass is you play one note at a time. You don't have to be you don't have to be Johann Sebastian anything. You can just play one note at a time. And it helps to be able to lock in with the drummer, which I found easy to do. And what I noticed over the years of playing bass, because I played almost every Sunday for 15 years, is that you realize that the very thing that gives you comfort when you begin, that is, no one will really notice you. You can't really hear the bass most of the time. Most of the time you can't. It's just a disturbance in the forest, right? But the very fact that you can't hear it is part of what makes it a great instrument, because it has the ability to shape a song. And the bass line that you choose to play helps the song to achieve a certain mood. And so even a novice like me was able to kind of have an effect and be part of something. And it was fun. It was my favorite part of church. It was a cool experience to be a bass player for a while. And now just recently, when I launched the book in my hometown of Duluth, I had asked a musician friend of mine, actually get this, a house painter and bar band guy from Duluth who was painting the house next door to mine. I just ran into him, and you know, we introduced ourselves, and he said, yeah, I paint houses and play in bar bands. And I went, no kidding, I just wrote a long story about it. And so Rainey, it gets more. Rainey has a band called Red Dog. This guy, Jamie, had a band called Wet Dog. They have the same birthday. I mean, it's a very odd confluence. And so we both felt like, oh, we're in an Abbott and Costello routine, right from the beginning. So when I had a pub date, I called Jamie and said, hey, would you play? Would you play for my opening? We were going to open at this nice brewery in West Duluth. And he said, can I read the book first? And I said, sure. So I gave him an early copy, and he got back to me and said, you know, he hadn't played in quite a while. He said, I'll come out of retirement for this. And he did. He played a couple of beautiful sets, and at the end of it, he said, look, sometimes I have people come over, and we just have dinner and a jam. He said, come over with your bass and let's jam. So I get to start playing music again. I'm so you guys have been really, really fun to talk to. Thanks for being interested. Thanks for coming out. Thanks for coming to this fabulous bookstore. Keep doing it.
Thank you.
All right, so if you haven't gotten your books yet, we've got I Cheerfully Refuse and a couple previous ones at the desk as well. So grab that, and then we'll start a signing line. We'll kind of snake through here. I'll move some chairs around, and we'll get your book signed. So thank you all so much for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm